6, 7 verses, and that will be the topic of discussion for Tuesday night as well. But I've never taught an entire book of the Bible in one setting. And we're going to cover the entire book of Esther, and I have went through every single chapter. I've dissected that. There's so much there in the book of Esther, so much there. And so I went through and I typed up a summary to keep us from having to read every single verse, because I'm trying to set the stage, build the platform for what the topic is tonight. And the title of the lesson is For Such a Time as This. So when we go through this, I'll point out some things as we go along with each chapter, and some chapters, of course, are longer than others. But when we get through at the very end, and basically, to be honest, setting the stage for this lesson is, did you get a copy? Okay. Setting the stage for this lesson and the introduction is actually the longest part of the lesson. And when we get to the meat of it toward the end, it won't be quite as long. And so, you see there where it says the location just kind of gives you the setting of where this takes place in Persia, in the city of Shushan, which is the capital of Persia. The king at that time is Ahasuerus. The queen is Vashti. I've heard some pronounce it. You got the chief advisor to the king, that is Haman. He is the evil one. He is the one that's going to persuade the king to make a decree to kill all the Jews. And then the ensuing queen, because the king will kick Queen Vashti out of the palace, out of the kingdom, and then he'll select a new queen, and that becomes Esther. Hadassah is her other name. We'll discuss that when we get to it. The ensuing chief advisor to the king ends up being Mordecai. Mordecai ends up taking Haman's position, and it's really a really deep story there, how all that transpires, and we'll kind of get into that. But Mordecai is also a cousin to Esther, but she becomes the adoptive father. Her parents pass away, and so she adopts her, and he is her adoptive father. And so he raises her. So there's only 2 books in the Bible to where the name God or Lord is not mentioned. The book of Esther is one of those, and the Song of Solomon is the other one. But there's no other book in the Bible to where God's providence and provision and watch care and love is shown nowhere greater than the book of Esther, but yet his name is never mentioned. Only one of 2 books where that's the case. A lot of times in our lives we go through things and we're like, where's God? You know, why is he allowing this to happen? You know, I can't feel his presence. I don't see him in my surroundings, in my environment. But yet, he's behind the scenes working. And when it's all said and done, then we look back and we see what God was doing the whole time, and we felt like he wasn't there. And that's kind of what happens here in the book of Esther. God's never mentioned, but he's all over this book. He is all over it. And so we're going to start here in chapter 1. And and we're going to go through and kind of give you a summary of the book of Esther here. And again, I'll get through it as quick as I can, point out some things as we go to get to the meat of the lesson tonight. Chapter 1. In the 3rd year of his reign, the king had a 7-day feast for all the people in Shushan, the capital city. And I put the verses there in parentheses. This being Bible school is a chance for you to be educated, not just to feel the Spirit and apply it to your life, but actually be educated. So I actually put the verses there where you can go back and you can read and study on your own time where all this comes from. The king demanded that Queen Vashti show off her beauty before all the people of the feast. Now, he was having this 7-day feast to show off his palace and to show off his kingdom and all the royal things that he had and how much money he had and how rich they were. And he was showing it off to all the people there. And so King Vashti was not, if you go back and read that entire chapter 1, she was not present at that feast. And so he called for her to come. He wanted her basically to come around, prance around, dance, whatever, and show off her beauty before all the men that he had there. And she refused to do that. It says that she refused to do so. This made the king mad. The king's men told the king that the queen done wrong. The king's servants and all told the king, said that she's done wrong not only to you, king, but to all the people in the provinces of the king. And they were afraid that this would cause all the other women to despise and disobey their husbands once they had heard what Queen Vashti had done of disobeying the king. So in other words, look, if we let her get by with this disobeying you, we're afraid this may have a domino effect, and our wives may disobey us and not, do what we've asked them to do or whatever. So this made the king mad, so he kicked King Vashti out of the kingdom, and she was no longer queen. Chapter 2, 3 years have passed. The Bible does not say why 3 years passed before he set out to find a new queen, but some of the commentaries that I read said that they were in the middle of a war at that time, so he was probably more focused on taking care of what was going on in the battle at that time instead of trying to select a new queen. So anyway, he 3 years later finally sets out to get a new queen. The king appointed officers in all the provinces of Persia or of his kingdom to bring in all the pretty young virgins they could find to the capital city so that he could select his next queen from this pool of women. Now, it says that 400 women were brought to the kingdom for the king to select from. Now, that number is not recorded there in the Bible from the things that I have read. The Persians were very adamant about keeping records, and you'll actually see that in some other chapters that we'll get to. They kept records of everything. So I don't know if from some of the ancient records they found out that there's about 400 women. I'm not going to be adamant and say that that was right, but from commentaries that I've read, that's what they have dug up and found, that there was about 400 women throughout all the provinces that come to that palace, basically to have a beauty pageant. And he was going to select his next queen from those women. They were given 1 year to prepare themselves. They were given oil of myrrh and sweet odors to beautify themselves. They were given a year to enhance their skin and their hair. They were going to be given special instructions on court etiquette, on how to act when you enter the king's courts, how to carry yourself, and how to present yourself to the king. So it's basically a beauty pageant. 12 months to beautify themselves. Now, guys, I guess I'm giving women ammunition here, but the next time we complain because they take 2 hours to get ready, they're probably going to say, well, the king gave them a year to get ready, so my 2 hours is nothing. Can you imagine a whole year? I mean, they were given, and the Bible specifically says they was given myrrh and they was given other things to enhance their skin, and these were young women, so it's not like they were done old and trying to reverse some aging or whatever. They were already young, but they were given a whole year to kind of get themselves ready for this so-called beauty pageant that they were having, and they were going to be going into the king's inner court one at a time, and he was going to select his queen in this manner. It says, and there were Jews living in the country because their parents and grandparents were brought there from Jerusalem under captivity when Nebuchadnezzar was king about a century earlier. So when they were in captivity and all the Jews were there came a time when they were allowed to go back to their homeland, and if they wanted to stay, they could. And there was a large remnant of Jews that stayed around, didn't go back to their homeland. And so Esther was one of the descendants of these particular Jews. Her Hebrew or Jewish name was Hadassah. Her Persian name was Esther, because the Jews that were in exile were given Persian names. This was customary for everybody to have a Persian name, and so they changed their names. Esther was one of the 400 women that was brought to the kingdom. Now, they didn't have a choice. I mean, if the king made a decree that all the ones in charge of all the provinces throughout the country there had to capture so many women and bring them in. And, imagine being one of those women, and since we're talking about Esther, Mordecai being her adoptive father, them coming in, barging into the house, and putting her in handcuffs, so to speak, and taking her to the palace. You could imagine how she would feel, how Mordecai would have felt. I mean, it was against her will, but she had to go anyway. We'll find later that it wasn't against God's will. A lot of times when things happen to us and, why has this happened to me? Why has this happened to me? And a lot of times we find out later that God had a hand in it the entire time, and we may think our world's falling apart, but God's right in the midst, and nothing happens to a child of God without God knowing it. The Bible also says that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord. And so, even though this might have been a horrible time of Esther being captured and carried to the palace for this beauty pageant, God had a plan the entire time. And tonight, when we go through this, and especially when we get to the end, we're going to talk about God's providence. We're going to talk about God's provision and God's plan. And that's where we're kind of getting to. So let's keep reading. After 12 months, each maiden would come before the king to present themselves to him. When it came Esther's turn to go before the king, she obtained favor from all of them, not just the king, but from all the servants and all the other people that worked under the king there. She obtained favor because of her beauty from all of them that looked upon her. The king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. The king set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen. That's in verse 17. The king did not know that Esther was a Jew, though. Now, she was charged by Mordecai, again, who is her adoptive father, actually her cousin, not to tell. In other words, Mordecai had told her, said, you cannot tell him you're a Jew. This could create a problem. There will come a time when you're going to have to reveal yourself and who you really are. But again, her name was changed. She didn't have that Jewish name anymore. They had a Persian name. And evidently she didn't look like some of the other Jews looked or whatever, so the king never knew she was a Jew. Obviously didn't ask or whatever. But Mordecai told her, do not tell the king that you're a Jew. There will come a time when you've got to reveal that. But I will let you know when, but right now do not reveal this. Now, before we go any further, the Bible does not say how old she was. It just says young virgins. But again, from all the stuff that I've read, and it's got to be from ancient records and such, she was somewhere between 14 and 16 years of age. 14, 15, or 16 years of age. Okay? Mordecai hung out around the palace. After she became queen, he hung out around the palace a good bit because he's concerned about Esther. Now, you imagine her being 14, 15, 16 years of age. He's raised her. He's concerned. He's concerned for her safety. So he hangs out around the palace a good bit. While he's hanging out around the palace, he overheard two of the king's chamberlains, two of the guards there, talking about trying to kill the king because they were upset with him. Now, again, the Bible does not tell why that these two guys was trying to get a plot against the king. I suspect maybe they kind of like Queen Vashti. And she got kicked out of the palace. Maybe they've been upset with him since that happened. And maybe they wasn't too fond of Queen Esther. I don't know. But regardless, you got these two chamberlains that's plotting to kill the king. Mordecai overhears their conversation. So Mordecai told Esther, and Esther told the king. We're over on the next page. The king found out that this was true because the Bible says they searched the matter and found out that it was true and ordered that these two men be hung, and it was documented in the book of records of the Chronicles what had happened. Now that's important right there because when we get to another chapter here in a minute, we're going to come back and talk about the book of records of the Chronicles. Again, I told you a while ago that the Persians were big about keeping records. And that's how some of these other things that I've added in are found out because they've kept records back since that time. And so anyway, they recorded in the book of records of the Chronicles that Mordecai basically was responsible for saving the king's life by overhearing this plot, and and then the king ordered that those two guys be hung. Chapter 3, the king took one of his men, Haman, and promoted him above all the princes to be chief advisor. Now, the Bible does not say the word chief advisor, but that's basically what he ended up being. The king commanded that everyone bow to Haman, but Mordecai would not bow to him, and this made Haman mad. Now, Mordecai is a Jew, okay? Jews are not taught to bow to other people, bow to God and God only. And so when Haman comes out of the palace, everybody's bowing. Mordecai's just standing there. He's not bowing. Haman recognizes it, calls him out. Over a period of several days, some of the king's men start questioning Haman, or questioning Mordecai. You know, why are you not bowing to Haman? This was a law. This was a decree. You have to do so. So it says Mordecai was confronted, and he eventually told them he was a Jew. Then Haman set out to destroy all the Jews because he hated them anyway to start with, especially now that Mordecai disrespected him. Haman convinced the king that all the Jews were a problem for the kingdom and they all needed to be annihilated. The king agreed and gave power to Haman to have them all killed. Sealed letters by the king were sent out to all provinces to destroy all the Jews. Now, I didn't put this in there, but it also says in the Bible that Haman had offered the king and the kingdom 10,000 talents of silver. If you'll make a decree and allow me to perform genocide, basically, annihilate all the Jews, I'll give 10,000 talents of silver to the kingdom. It's equivalent to about $19 million. He had money. Money talks. And so the king said, and Haman also told him, said, look, we got this Jew Mordecai that is refusing to bow to me, and that was a decree. He's going to convince the other Jews not to do that. Jews are multiplying like crazy. They're going to end up taking over your throne. And king's like, no, let's kill him. So they sent letters out, sealed letters by the king were sent out to all the provinces to destroy all the Jews. Now, you know where Haman came from? He is a descendant of a remnant of Jews, of a remnant of people, not Jews, of a remnant of people that God had ordered Saul to kill prior to that, sometime back, a couple of generations back. And God had gave Saul a command to kill a certain group of people. And if you know that story, he didn't kill them all. And it displeased God because he didn't finish wiping out that group of people. Haman is a descendant of that small group of people that he did not finish killing off, that he was commanded by God to do so. And God was angry with Saul. So here's the story behind that. When you have something in your life, sin, some other issue, that God tells you to deal with, and deal with it then and take care of it, and we don't, and we just kind of brush it under the rug and it's okay, it'll be fine. It kind of goes away. Does it really go away? It will surface again later, and more times than not, when it surfaces again later, it comes back stronger than ever. If Saul had obeyed God and wiped those people out, we wouldn't be having this right here in the book of Esther. The Jews are about to be destroyed, and Haman is the evil one that is going to carry that out. But that wouldn't be an issue if Saul had obeyed. So when we have things in our lives that God tells us and points out to us and convicts us about and tells us to deal with that, we better deal with it. Because if we kind of brush it under the rug and we don't deal with it, it's going to surface again later. Chapter 4. Mordecai heard about the decree that was made by the king. Again, he was invoked to do so by Haman. Mordecai heard about this decree, sent word to Esther, and told her that she had to go before the king and stop this from being done. And she said she couldn't because she had not been called by the king. If she went before the king without being called, she could be killed, and this was true for anyone. No one could go before the king without being called, even the queen. There was a law that was in the land at that time, and also when any decree or law was made, nobody could overturn it, not even the king himself. Could not be overturned. You're going to see that a little bit later as well. So there was a law that said in order for you to go into the king, into his inner court, you had to be called. You had to be summoned. You had to be asked to come in to see him. And she was telling Mordecai, I can't go into the king and persuade him not to kill the Jews. I've not been called. And if I do go in, I'm taking a risk, I'm taking a gamble, and if I go in and he has favor on me, he'll hold out his golden scepter, and that lets me know I'm safe and I can go in. But that's a big risk. And he's like, you're queen. It don't matter. It's the law. Even the queen could not go into the king without being summoned by the king. Says if they did and the king didn't hold out the golden scepter, then they would be killed. If he held out the golden scepter when they went in, then they knew that they were safe. But it was a big risk. She had not even been called to come into the king for the last 30 days. In other words, she's saying, Mordecai, I've not even seen my husband for 30 days. What kind of marriage is that? That's something wrong there. That tells me they wasn't on the best of terms. How would you go 30 days without having your wife to come in, 30 days? There had to be something going on there. So she was taking a risk. Number one, we're at odds with one another, but it's also a law, and I know better than anybody else. This is an issue, Mordecai. My life's at risk here, and we're not on best of terms. So Mordecai sent word back to her. Now Mordecai wasn't talking to her directly because she was in the palace and Mordecai was outside. There was a mediator between the two, and they were sending words back and forth. If you read the chapter, you'll pick up on that. Mordecai sent word back to her and said, don't think you're going to escape from all this if you don't go and plead with the king. If you don't stand up for the Jews, of which she was one herself, then deliverance will come from somewhere else, but you and your father's family will be destroyed. Now, what he's saying here is Mordecai knew God's word. And Mordecai was a follower of God. He was very spiritual, and you can tell when you read and what all the decisions he made. And so he knew the promises that God had made, that the nation Israel, the Jewish people, will never be annihilated. Never. Because, and this is over on the last page, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but it's underneath God's plan in the book of Esther. God's plan was to make sure the Jewish people was protected from being annihilated. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. I will help thee. I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall for thy sake. No weapon is formed against thee. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. Every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. God had promised the nation of Israel they'd always be protected. So Mordecai is saying, look, if you don't go in on our behalf to try to protect us from being killed, deliverance is going to come from somewhere else. God's going to provide deliverance. I know that, Esther. But God has called you for such a time as this. Esther, you may have been brought to this kingdom for this same very reason, for this particular reason, right here and right now. And that's what I've got down there. It says, he also said, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? In other words, he was saying, who knows, perhaps it was for a time like this that you became queen. God's made provision for you to be there. He's given you providence. He's watched over you and taken care of you, and He's made provisions for you to be here, for you to go into the king and plead on our behalf to have for the Jews to not be annihilated. And so you have here that Esther is having some doubt. I mean, she's scared. She's young. I can't go before the king. I've not been called. We ain't talked in 30 days. And Mordecai's telling her, Esther, you don't have a choice. You got to go. Because God was speaking to Mordecai and telling Mordecai, if you don't go, there's going to be deliverance from some other source. But you and your home will be destroyed. So in our lives, when God speaks to us and tells us, this is what I want you to do, and He lays something upon our heart, and we don't obey, we don't follow the conviction of the Holy Spirit, there's consequences to face. When God speaks, we are to obey. When you don't obey, there's consequences. And so, at this point, Queen Esther begins to get under conviction. She basically tells Mordecai, you know what, you're right. You're right. So let's do this. So the next paragraph says, Esther told Mordecai to gather all the Jews together that are in the capital city and to fast for 3 days for her protection and the protection of all the Jews. She said that she and her maidens were going to fast also. Then she said, after this fast, I will then go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. But I've got to do this. It's my mission. This is why I'm here. And I'm going to do it. But let's fast and tomorrow night. That's the title of the lesson is the power of fasting. And we'll refer back to this along with some other verses tomorrow night about the benefits of fasting and prayer and the power of fasting and how we fast for protection and we fast for deliverance and we fast for guidance and we fast for power to resist temptation. And we'll talk about that tomorrow night. But she realized here, up to her. And I don't want my family to be destroyed. So let's do this. And we're going to fast for protection. And if I perish, I perish. Now there's two things to learn right here where it says, which is not according to the law. Just because the government has a rule, a law, a decree, a mandate, doesn't mean we have to follow it if it contradicts God's Word. Now the Bible plainly says we are to obey those that have authority over us, and that is true. And as long as it does not contradict the Word of God, we are to obey that. But once it crosses the line of dishonoring God, we are not to obey the government. And she says, I'm going. Not according to law, but I'm going. What happened in the book of Daniel? There was a decree made that you could pray to no other God except King Darius. And what did Daniel do? Defied that. Went to his house, opened up the windows of heaven, and did as he had before time, and prayed 3 times a day. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What happened there? The king made an image that they was to bow down to. And they didn't bow. And so they was going to throw them in the fiery furnace. The king was going to throw the 3 Hebrew men into the fiery furnace. And in Daniel chapter 3, verse 17 said, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. In other words, they were saying, we perish, we perish. But I must obey God, and He'll protect me. But if He doesn't, great is your reward in heaven. You will be rewarded. If He doesn't protect you here, then you're going to receive a reward for your obedience in heaven. And so Esther is saying here, I'm going to go into the king. We're going to fast first, and then if I perish, I perish. So fasting can do 2 things. I'm kind of getting ahead just a little bit. You can fast for protection and pray that God provides that, but fasting also does something else. It prepares your heart for whatever the answer is. You may not get exactly what you are asking and requesting of God, but it prepares your heart to accept whatever the answer is. And so when they fasted, she's like, basically what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said. I believe He's going to protect me. But if not, I'm willing to accept whatever. And fasting will get you to that point. Chapter 5. Esther went into the inner courts to the king, knowing she was taking a big risk, and she received no opposition. She obtained favor in his sight. He held out the golden scepter and accepted her. And I put in parentheses there, God can cause doors to open that no man can shut. But sometimes it takes humbleness on our part and a step of faith for that to happen. He said to her, what do you want, Esther? What is your request? It shall be given thee even half of the kingdom. And how powerful is prayer and fasting? Because she didn't really know if this would happen or not. She asked for a banquet with him, herself, and Haman. So the king granted it, but at the banquet, she just kind of felt like the timing wasn't right. So she asked for another banquet for the next day. He granted it also. Later that day, Haman seized Mordecai in the king's gate, and Mordecai ignored Haman and did not give reference to him. And this made Haman furious. Again, he's already mad at Mordecai for not bowing to him earlier. Now here comes Haman through the king's gate. And the Bible says that Mordecai, I didn't put this in there, it says Mordecai did not move. He's in the way. I ain't living for you. I'm not giving any kind of reference to you. Well, this really infuriates Haman. So Haman ordered that a gallows, which is a structure used to perform a hanging, be made for hanging Mordecai. I mean, he's done with him. I'm like, I'm done with you. Yeah, we got a decree that we're going to annihilate all of you, but I'm going to take you first. And we're going to have a gallows made. We're going to hang you, buddy. I'm not going to be disrespected like that. All right, so we'll come back to that in a different chapter. So, chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he commanded that the books of records of the chronicles, we talked about that in chapter 2 just a few minutes ago. He couldn't sleep, so he told his servant, he said, I want the book of records of the chronicles be brought and read to me. What? I can't sleep, so let's just read the records. It's kind of like when you can't sleep and go get the phone book and just start reading it. You'll get sleepy. Counting sheep, whatever. That's kind of what this was. Bring those records of books of chronicles. That'll put me to sleep. So they start reading that to him. They get to the part about what Mordecai did for the king, where the two chamberlains was going to plot to kill him. Back up in chapter 2, they get to that part, and the king's like, oh, I forgot about that. Did we ever do anything for this guy and honor him for saving my life? I'm kind of paraphrasing. Let's kind of read it here. This reminded him of what Mordecai had done when he saved the king from being killed by two of his chamberlains, because it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles, according to chapter 2, verse 23. The king realized that nothing had been done to honor Mordecai for his tremendous deed. So then, the king hears somebody out in the outer court, or maybe sees somebody in the outer court. And he says, the king asked, who is in the outer court? And the servant said, it's Haman. Well, Haman was there waiting to go in to see the king to tell him about him wanting to hang Mordecai. Of course, the king didn't know that. But that's why Haman was there in the outer court. He's going in to get the king's permission to hang Mordecai, because he's wanting him dead. And so he told Haman to come on in. Then he asked Haman, what should be done to the man that the king delighteth in? Now, remember, this is not why Haman's there. He's there to get permission to hang Mordecai. And so, but yet the king is in the middle of discussing, we didn't do anything to honor Mordecai before when he saved my life. Of course, Haman don't know anything about this. So he just asked Haman, what should be done to the man that I delighteth in? Now, who do you think Haman's thinking he's talking about? Thinking he's talking about Haman. And so Haman begins to tell him, so Haman told the king what should be done to the man that he delighteth in. He said that this man should be given the king's royal apparel to wear, the king's horse to ride, and the king's crown to wear on his head. He should then be led through the street of the city and proclaim that the king delighteth in him. So the king commanded that Haman do this to Mordecai. Haman's like, what? I thought you was talking about me. No, he's talking about Mordecai. Haman gave the answer of what he wanted to do for him, and it ended up being the answer that the king wanted to do for Mordecai. He said, well, I want you to do this for Mordecai. And this infuriated Haman. Not only was he not the man the king was talking about, but he was the one that had to do the honoring. Yeah, see how God works? He'll take care of his children if you just be faithful. And Mordecai was faithful. Chapter 7. We got to hurry. On the second day of the banquet, remember she asked for another day of the banquet between her and the king and Haman, because on the first day when she asked for that banquet to go in and make a petition under the king about saving the Jews, she just felt like the timing wasn't right, so she asked for another one. He granted that unto her. Esther is asked by the king, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted to you. She requested that her and her people be saved and not destroyed by Haman. She reveals at this point to the king that she's a Jew. The king is furious. Now, you would think that as soon as she tells the king, you know, hubby, I've been married for a while. I'm a Jew, by the way. You would think the king would be like, you kept that a secret? There's nothing recorded in the Bible that shows that he was upset about that. When he finds out she's a Jew and knows that Haman wanted to destroy the Jews, he's like, that ain't going to happen. You're my wife. You're not going to be annihilated. See how prayer works? God can do things that we can't do. God can do more in 20 minutes than we can do in 20 years. It takes prayer, and sometimes it takes fasting. So the king is furious that Haman would do such a thing, especially now that he knows his queen's a Jew. So the king orders that Haman be hung on the same very gallows that Haman had made for Mordecai. So Haman makes this gallows to hang Mordecai, and now they're going to take that and hang Haman. That reminds me of a verse in Psalms 57, verse 6. They dug a pit before me, but they themselves have fallen into it. You better be careful if you're setting a trap for somebody, especially if it's for one of God's children. Because the same very snare, the same very trap, the same very net, the same very pit that you're creating for somebody, you're probably going to fall in it. And the person that's probably going to dig you out of it is the one that you set it for to start with. You better be careful. God has a way of protecting His children. Chapter 8. Esther revealed how she was kin to Mordecai. He had just told her earlier that she was a Jew, or she had just told him earlier she was a Jew. But now she reveals how she's kin to Mordecai. So this caused the king to like Mordecai even more, because he was done honoring him for saving his life from these two guys that was plotting to kill him in chapter 2. So now that he knows that Mordecai is actually kin to Esther, he really likes this guy now. So he gives him a position in the palace. Esther requested to the king that the letters be reversed that was originally sent out by Haman to destroy all the Jews. Well, the king could not reverse any decree that was already made. I told you a while ago, when a law was made, no man could reverse it, not even the king. And so he tells Esther, I can't reverse it. It's against the law. I can't do that. So what he does, it says that, so he made another decree that said the Jews could actually defend themselves. If you look in verses 10, 11, 13, and 14, they sent word out to all the provinces to tell the Jews that and this was coming from the government, we want you to stand up and protect yourself. On this particular day, when this genocide is going to happen, we're giving you power to stand up and protect yourself. Well, when the Jews got word of this, that gave them joy and gladness because of this decision by the king. And listen to this. Many of the people of the land became Jews because the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So it caused other ones to become Jews because they're like, now we got the government on our side. You see how God works? I mean, He can take a mess and do a mighty work. He can take a mess and, of course, make a message out of it. But He can take a mess and do a miracle. And He's turning everything around right here. So the decree in chapter 9 to have all the Jews killed was to take place on the 13th day of the month Adar. Now that month Adar is the same as our month March. So this was the day that they had set aside for this to happen. The fear of Mordecai, again, remember, he's got a position now in the palace. The fear of Mordecai fell upon all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and the officers of the king. So they helped the Jews fight on that day. Now, remember, Mordecai's a Jew. They find out that Esther's a Jew. Esther's the queen. Mordecai's got a pretty lofty position there. And so now you've got all the deputies and the lieutenants and all the officers of all the other provinces like, okay, they say to help the Jews fight. We were going to be the ones to help kill them to start with in that first decree. Well, we got this second decree, and they're asking us to be a part of protecting them. I mean, everything just flip-flops. Mordecai's fame went out throughout all the provinces, and he waxed greater and greater, it says in verse 4. So, in short, the Jews killed all their enemies. On the 14th day of the month of Adar, the Jews from the other provinces, all the unwalled towns, made it a day of feasting and gladness. The battle only lasted one day, which was on the 13th. But in the capital city, On the 15th day of the month of Adar, the Jews in the capital city made it a day of feasting. This was because that battle lasted for 2 days, the 13th and the 14th. So you have on the 14th day of the month, all the unwalled towns were feasting and glad and celebrating. Then on the 15th in the capital city, they done the same thing. Mordecai established the 14th and 15th day of the month of Adar to be remembered yearly and be known as days of Purim, in order to celebrate the saving of the Jews when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning was turned into a good day. The Jews ordained these 2 days to be remembered and kept throughout every generation as a memorial. The month of Adar is our month of March. These 2 days are still celebrated today in the Jewish community, Jewish nation, 2,500 years after being established. They are held on different days in March, and I've looked this up, and there was sometimes they're actually held in February. But these 2 days are still remembered as a memorial for what happened back during the days of Esther. Jerusalem celebrates a day later than all the unwalled towns because Jerusalem being a walled city. This represents Shushan, the capital city there in Persia, because they celebrated the day later because their battle lasted, for 2 days. It is to commemorate the saving of the Jewish people from Haman. Anybody ever heard of Days of Purim? It's a Jewish holiday. Still do it, even today. It comes back to this right here. Chapter 10, Mordecai was promoted in the kingdom to even a higher level. He went to chief advisor, which was the same position that Haman had in the very beginning. It all started with him saving the king's life from the king's perspective, but from God's perspective, it was from being an encourager to Esther to go before the king to persuade him to save the Jews. So, as I studied this, you hear people, preachers preach, teachers teach, whatever, about Esther, Esther, Esther. What about Mordecai? If it wasn't for Mordecai, remember, Esther didn't want to do it. And Mordecai was the encourager. When you go about your day seeing somebody that's down and out and needs a word of encouragement, and you encourage somebody and you make their day, you're just as important of what you just did than somebody that might be on a bigger platform. Mordecai is going to have a reward in heaven for what he did, because he not only raised the girl, he stayed out by the palace to kind of keep check on her, hung around, heard what was going to go on. Esther didn't want to go in before the king, and Mordecai said, honey, you got to go. You got to go. And so God rewards Mordecai. Instead of him getting killed, his enemy, Haman, gets killed on the same gallows that he created for Mordecai. Mordecai gets put on the royal stuff by the king and gets put on his horse and rode through town, and they honor him. He ends up getting the same position that Haman had to start with. Ain't God good? And he can do the same thing for you if you're simply obedient. And Mordecai's position doesn't look like it's very important, but it was. So you may not be an Esther, have a big stage, a big platform to save a country, but you can be a Mordecai. And you're just as important as anybody else in the kingdom. Look at the last page. I gave you a definition there of the word providence. I gave you a definition of provision and plan. Providence is God's protective care, a manifestation of divine care or direction. Provision, the act of being prepared beforehand, the act of providing a supply of something for future use, the act of making previous preparation, timely preparation for future events. So let's look at God's providence in the book of Esther. Number one, God's providence was shown when Esther went before the king to plead for the safety of the Jews. Because of their fasting and their prayer and their faith, she was protected. God gave providence when Mordecai was not hung by Haman. God protected his life, but yet Haman was hung instead. God gave providence that was shown when the Jews fought and killed all their enemies. Now, think about this as well. What did Esther ask the king that she wanted him to do? Keep the Jews from being killed. Okay? The Bible says that God, and Brother Shannon, you preached on it the other day, God can do over and abundantly, exceedingly greater than we can ask or think. She just wanted to be protected. I don't want my people to be annihilated. Not only did the king help in that manner, but he also said, fight against them. And other ones got killed. Haman got killed. A lot of the enemy got killed. And the Bible records how many, and I didn't record it here, but you can go back and look in the book of Esther, how many of the enemy got killed. She wasn't asking for that. She's just saying, we don't want to be killed. But God carried it further because of their faith. God's provision in the book of Esther. God made provisions by making sure Esther was captured and brought into the palace to become queen. God made provisions by making sure Mordecai was standing outside the palace to overhear two of the king's chamberlain that were plotting to kill him. He was at the right place at the right time. And of course, this gained favor with the king for Mordecai. Number 3, God made provisions by making sure Mordecai became the adoptive father so that he could be there and be an encourager to her and persuade her to go before the king. God made provisions by making sure Haman was standing outside the inner court when he went in to the king. When the king was talking about honoring Mordecai, of course, remember, Haman was there to talk to him about hanging Mordecai. He made provisions to make sure that Haman was standing out there so he would end up being the one to honor Mordecai. He wasn't supposed to be there to start with. God's provision. And then God's plan, and I read these verses a while ago, is to make sure that the Jewish people be protected from being annihilated and that he fulfill his promise to them. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. They shall surely gather together. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall. God's got conditional wills and he's got unconditional wills. A conditional will is he wants to do this and this and this, provided his children do what they're supposed to do. And if you don't do what he's leading you to do, then that will not get done. He's also got unconditional wills. Regardless of what decision you make, there's certain things going to be done. He's going to make sure that those unconditional wills are carried out, whether you obey or not. If Esther had not obeyed, she would have suffered the consequences, but the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, were going to be protected regardless. So he has conditional wills and unconditional wills. And so sometimes in our lives, at certain times in our lives, God will have something for us to do. And every child of God will be called upon by God at some point for such a time as this. What your calling will be different than what his calling will be, and his calling will be, and her calling will be. God's got a plan for everybody. He may want you to be a Mordecai. Just be at the right place at the right time. Follow his will. Be an encourager. He may want you to be an Esther. He may have something grand for you to do on a bigger scale. But if you're a child of God, he's got a plan for you. And I believe it's in the book of Jeremiah. Might be wrong. I think it's Jeremiah. For I know the thoughts that I have for you. In other words, the plans. I know the plan that I have for you. He's got a plan for every one of us, regardless of what it is. Well, I don't have the capability. I don't have the ability to do this and that. That's not what he wants. Brother Shannon said it many a times. What he's wanting is your availability. And he'll provide the way. And he'll pave the road for you as you go when you step out on faith. God was making provision for Queen Esther to be at that particular spot at that particular time. And she didn't know it. You have no idea how God might be making provisions for you right now to touch somebody's life. To be an encourager. To be a help. You might need to provide financial support for somebody. It may be a phone call. It may be a card. It might be a neck hug. It might be a I love you. It could be something greater than that. But God's got something for everybody. If you've been born again, you're a child of the King. He will use every single person, but you've got to be willing. I don't want to refer to the Christian life as a game of life, but to get my point across. It's kind of like a basketball game. I played basketball coming through school. I coached for about 8 years. Dad coached. Tyler, my youngest son's here. He's coaching now, and some of you other ones may have been involved in sports or whatever. But just think of 5 players being on a basketball court. And you've got the bench. You got 5 more players sitting over here. You can't be all out there at the same time. But the ones sitting on the bench are the encouragers, the cheerleaders, encouraging those on the front line that's out there in the spotlight. You might be the number 1 position. If you know anything about basketball, you got a 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and a 5. The point guard's a 1, the shooting guard's a 2, the other guard's a 3. You got a strong forward, and you got a small forwards. You got centers. You got the 4s and the 5s. Not everybody has the same position. You got somebody bringing the ball down. You got somebody that's the shooting guard. You got somebody rebounding or whatever. Everybody's got their own position, their own things that they do. So sometimes when you mess up, you keep turning the ball over, you're not playing defense, you're not rebounding, coach has got to take you out. He takes you out, starting to line up, he sets you on the bench, talks to you, encourages you, may have to chew you out some, put somebody else in. When the coach walks over to that bench, and the game's in the heat of the moment, and this clock's ticking down, you're in the last quarter, and you're behind by 2 or 3 points, and coach needs somebody to go in and give an extra boost of energy. And the coach looks over there and says, Kevin, are you ready? I need you. Go in and get so-and-so. He's injured, he's hurt, or he's not performing. He needs to come out. When God calls your name, He needs you to check in. Larry, I need you to do this. Jeff, I need this done. I need this ministry started. I need this class to be taught. I need this person for you to go witness to. Are you going to be ready to check in? God's making provisions, and you don't even know it. He's going to call your name. He's going to need you in that starting lineup. Queen Esther had no idea what she was there for. And Mordecai said, Esther, just maybe you're here for such a time as this. And I don't want to miss that calling, because there's consequences to face when God calls your name and you're not ready. The coach looks over there and calls you by name. You're a sub, and you're sitting over there, and he calls your name, and you're like, Coach, this game's too tight. I can't do it. I'm scared. I'm not prepared. I've not been at the last 2 practices, and I've not been performing. Coach, I can't go in. What a shame. So he goes to the next person. I need you. Let's go. Go get so-and-so. That person jumps up and says, Coach, who am I getting? Who am I getting? Go in and get so-and-so. He's hurt, or he's just not performing. Or maybe it's not because you're not performing. It's that sometimes, and if you've ever coached, you know what I'm talking about, you just need a change up. Maybe you need to slow the game down a little bit, and everybody you got there has one speed and it's wide open. You need to get some of them out and slow it down. Or vice versa. You need to speed it up and put my speedsters in there. Or I just need some defensive power right here, more so than shooting power. And so he swaps people in and out to put the right personnel in for that particular moment. And the same thing's true in God's kingdom. Maybe you're involved in this ministry and God's like, look, we need to change things up a little bit, and I need you to go do this and take this person's place. And what I'm fixing to tell you bothered me for a while. I finally got past it. Most of you know I went through a divorce a couple of years ago. I was a deacon for 11 years. I had to resign as deacon. I had to come out the game. And God looked over there and said, Dwight, I need you. Need you to go in and check in for Kevin. I need you out there. He's hurt. He's injured. He's turning the ball over. He needs to come out for a little while. He needs to be ministered to over here. He needs a trainer. Get him some Gatorade. Get him some encouragement. When he set me down, he said, I'm not done with you. You're going to go back in. Your name will be called again. It might be the next game, but your name's going to be called again. I pray I'm ready. When my name's called for that shining moment, for that particular time, for such a time as this, I pray I'm ready. Are you going to be ready? Your name's going to be called at some point in time. If you miss your calling, pray for God's forgiveness. Pray for His grace and His sovereignty that He'll call your name again. He ain't going to kick you off the team. You're still on His team. But are you going to be ready when your name's called the next time? I've missed some opportunities in the past when my name was called, and I said no. And when my name's called again, I don't want to miss those opportunities. I feel like that teaching Bible school was one of those times my name was called. I had started preparing the lessons that I'm going to be teaching this week and taught tonight before I was ever asked about Bible school. Dad had been teaching it for a few years now. God began to work on me about some of these lessons, and I didn't know when I was going to teach them. I said, He'll provide an opportunity somewhere. And He made provisions. And I was asked to teach. And I instantly said, yes, I want to check in. I want to check in. I'll do what I can for the kingdom. Are you going to be ready when your name is called? God's got His unconditional wills, and regardless of what you do, His will be accomplished. But He also has conditional wills, and it will only be accomplished if you meet those conditions. I'll close with this story. My oldest son, Josh, is an ag teacher at Benjamin Russell High School in Alexander City, around the central part of the state. Been there for about 5 years now, him and Bailey. And hopefully Josh will be here tomorrow night. But last couple of years, he's been putting a rodeo on there in the community. They have in the recreational area that they have there in Alex City, they have an open arena. And so Josh has gotten this professional rodeo company to come in and do a rodeo. It's a fundraiser for his ag program, for his program after school, for his kids. And they sell tickets and all that, and pre-sell some tickets and sell some there at the gates. And so the rodeo was last weekend, last Friday night and Saturday night. And last year when he started it, I went down and helped him, and he was needing some help with the parking and needing somebody to be in charge of that. And so I went down this past weekend and helped him again. And he had a lot of stuff going on, detailed stuff he was having to take care of. And so he had asked me if I'd come down and help again with the parking, so I did. And Anissa went down with me, and we were getting everybody parked. Parking's kind of scarce, so we was trying to get them all in there. So it started at 7 o'clock last Friday night. We had to get there about 4:30. People gets there early. He had about right at 900 people there that night on Friday night, 893 to be exact. And I was expecting a bigger crowd on Saturday night. About 5 o'clock, it came a 10-minute shower, rained. And one of the big areas we was going to park in was a grassy area. Was afraid that it might have been too wet, but we checked it and everything seemed to be fine. We was checking the radar. Open arena, no closed facility at all, open arena. We kept checking the radar. After that shower passed through, nothing showing for the rest of the night. Nothing on the radar from Mississippi across Alabama, nothing. So Josh said, we're good, we can carry on. About 5 minutes before the rodeo started, a cloud started building in the distance there. We pulled up the radar. Where did this come from? Hell, it wasn't there. We was checking it every 15, 20 minutes. Rodeo got started, and the rodeo company that he works with is a Christian-based organization, company, and the guy that runs that rodeo company is a preacher, and he does a devotion at the very beginning of every rodeo. Awesome. They do the national anthem. He does a 5, 10, 15-minute devotion. This cloud starts building. And so I called Josh. I'm out in the parking area, and parking people still coming in. I called him. I said, you see that cloud? He said, yeah, we see it. He said, that thing come out of nowhere. I said, you're right. I said, what are y'all going to do? He said, we're just going to see what happens. The guy gives his devotion. They go ahead and start bringing all the animals in because they do the national anthem. When they do that, they parade all the horses and people in and do the national anthem. Then they start the rodeo. They had already done that. Was fixing to start the rodeo. I mean, it gets dark. It gets literally just almost dark. And the bottom falls out. I mean, torrential rain. It was nowhere on the radar. Nowhere. Starts to lightning. I've never been that close to lightning in my life before. 2 big old bolts of lightning came straight down, straight line lightning. And you could hear the clap of thunder before the lightning bolt ever disappeared. It was that close. It was right on top of us. You got 900 people sitting on aluminum bleachers. And so I'm not where Josh is at, but I'm calling him. I said, what are y'all going to do? I said, we got people that's actually still driving in, believe it or not. He said, we're talking right now. We're going to make a decision. So they make a decision to postpone it to the next morning, Saturday morning. They're still going to have the other one that night because the only thing about rodeos, these people are actually trying to qualify for nationals. And they have to have 2 different nights. So anyway, they're still going to have the one Saturday night. They moved the one Friday night to Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And so the rodeo guy said, look, you're going to have to give rain checks. You got any way to give rain checks? And Josh said, well, some of them's got ticket stubs, but that's only the ones that pre-ordered. If they come into the gate and they paid, then they don't have a ticket stub. He said, last year, I had ordered enough tickets to give away at the gate, and if I'd done that this year, they'd have their ticket stub, and they had stamps. If somebody had to leave and come back, they'd stamp their hand. But they was afraid to stamp their hand because if it rained, it's going to get washed off. They're going to take a shower when they get home. They wouldn't have it tomorrow. So they said, we got to have something to put a stamp on. I didn't order extra tickets. They'd have their ticket stub if we gave them away at the gate, but we didn't do that this year. One of the guys of the rodeo, and I think it's the guy that's in charge. Anyway, this other guy, he was also a preacher as well. He said, well, I tell you what. Just by chance, I got 1,000 tracts in the back seat of my truck. Gospel tracts. Just got them. I don't know what his original intent was. I don't know if he's a pastor of a church and he's going to put them out at church like we do out here. Anyway, he didn't say, but he said, it just so happens I got 1,000 tracts in a package in the back seat of my truck. If you don't object, Josh, we can take those and y'all can stamp them and hand them out as you go out the gate. Josh said, I'm good with it. Let's go. It's pouring down rain. It's lightning. People are standing around trying to figure out, what are y'all going to do? What are y'all going to do? We got to get out of here. And some had already left. So they got on the intercom, made an announcement. You're going to get a rain check as you go out the gate. You can come back in the morning at 9 o'clock or you can come back the next night. Now, some of the people had already left. Still over 800 people there. There's the track. 3 things God cannot do. God cannot lie, God cannot change, God cannot allow sinners into heaven, and it gives the plan of salvation right there on that second page. Over 800 tracts were handed out in less than 15 minutes. God made provisions for that to occur. It was not by happen chance, by some weird chance that Josh did not order extra tickets to hand out at the gate, because if he had of, they would have said, take your ticket stub, we'll stamp it as you go out. He said, I just didn't order extra ones to give away at the gate. God made provisions for that to not happen. That cloud that came up, I found out the next day by talking to another guy. He said that cloud formed over Lake Martin, which is right there in Alex City, come out of nowhere. It was perfectly clear 15 minutes before that cloud occurred. So when I got back to Josh and Bailey's that night, after it was over, I didn't know all that had happened at that time. And he began to tell me, and chill bumps went all over me. I said, son, I hope you can see that God had a hand in that. He intended for those tracts in the back seat of that preacher man's truck that did not bring them for that reason. He intended for those to be handed out. That is an unconditional will, regardless of what decisions you make, what God intended for that to be done. It took a cloud that was formed over Lake Martin, with two big old lightning bolts striking straight down, that I've never been that scared of lightning until that night, because I've never been that close to one. Because otherwise, if the lightning hadn't have occurred, those people would have sat there trying to wait out the rain to see what was going to happen. And God said, nope, I want you out of here. I want you going through that gate, taking these tracks, and go home. And that's exactly what happened. That was God's plan. He made provisions for it. He provided providence because nobody got struck by lightning sitting on aluminum bleachers. It was amazing. Never seen anything like it before in my life. And I told Josh, I said, you may never know what difference one of those tracks made in one person's life. And with 800 people, I would have dared to say that it's going to be a bunch of them. And when you're standing in heaven and you're up there on the streets of gold, and up walks a man and says, Josh, you don't know me, but on July the 9th, 2021, y'all handed out some tracts for a rain check. You stamped them for a rain check for the next day. And I read, now let me tell you something. Just be honest, what usually happens when somebody gets a gospel tract? Yeah, it goes in the trash. Not always, but sometimes. You hear reports of people getting saved or it touching their lives in some way. They couldn't do that. That was their ticket back in the next day. So it had to sit on the console of their vehicle for 24 hours, or it had to sit on their kitchen table or their bedroom dresser, and they're going to walk by and see it 2, 3, and 4 times. At some point in time, there's going to be a conviction. Power of the Holy Spirit says, read that. For God to make that provision, you can't tell me that somebody wasn't touched. You never know how God's working in your life and other people's lives. That was going to be done regardless. But if God has a conditional will and He wants me to help accomplish that and I don't, and that will never gets done, there's consequences to follow. I know I've went over, and actually we got till 8:30. You got 3 minutes left. So the point of the whole thing is, you never know what God's doing. And Josh didn't get upset about, he could have very easily got upset about, messing up the rodeo, the dirt's all nothing but mud, and Josh just like, it is what it is. You never know when God messes up your plans, what mighty work that He's trying to do. And one more thing I'm going to add to that, and I'll close. The next morning, there wasn't very many people that showed up, because that was Saturday morning, so most of them are going to come back the next night. But the next night, an hour before the rodeo started, for a complete hour, it rained, and it rained, and it rained. No lightning, just rain. So he didn't have the crowd that night that he thought he was going to have. So he lost some gate money. It's for a fundraiser. He didn't make the money that he was going to make. But I told him, I said, son, there was a greater work being done besides a fundraiser. And I said, because you didn't get upset about it, and it is what it is, I said, God will bless you. And he said, Dad, He already has. He said, a week ago, there was a state representative that's been giving us some funding for certain things throughout the year, and he said, I've got some teams going to national competition this fall. He was already going to give me $2,000 to help support that team. And I was expecting the $2,000. He already told me he's going to help pay our way to national competition. He said, but when he came to see me, he said, I've got your $2,000, but I've got something else too. He said, I've got an extra $6,000. Just going to give to you. $8,000. I asked Josh when all this happened, I said, how much gate money do you think you've lost because of the weather? He said about 5 or 6. I couldn't help but cry. I said, you better give God thanks. He took care of you, and He got the gospel out at the same time. It's the way God works. Are you going to be ready when your name's called for such a time as this? I pray I am. I pray I am. Anybody got a word? It is exactly 8:30. I actually was going to try to be done by 8:15, but anyway, at least we didn't go over the allotted time.